Good evening and welcome to this latest in the Elephant TV's conversations. And today it's my singular pleasure to be joined by Ms. Soreti Kadir, all the way from Melbourne, Australia. Soreti is an Oromo storyteller and activist and organizer with the Wala Bomo Coalition, which means complete liberation. Welcome, Soreti. I hope I pronounced that right. I'm sure I sort of mangled it.
You pronounced everything right. My name, the name of the coalition. Thanks so much for having me, John. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Soreti. Let me just start by asking, the developments in Ethiopia over the past few months have been really in the news as a result of what's happening in Tigray, the basic, what seems to be like a internal civil war, with the TPLF being designated a terrorist organization by the central government forces being sent into that region, being routed. But I wanted to ask what the implications of this are, especially for other regions of Ethiopia. You come from Oromo, Prime Minister Abiy comes from Oromo. Give us a bit of context, what's going on and what does it mean?
Yeah, that's a necessary and complex question, John. And again, thank you for having me for this conversation. The ramifications of the war overall, but particularly the recent recapture of Tigray's capital city, Mekele, by the Tigray Defense Forces are far-reaching. And you mentioned something that I just want to touch on before I talk a little bit about this wars and these recent developments' relationship to Oromia, is the central government's use of the tactic of labeling and narrative to, I guess, square or contextualize the TPLF as a terrorist organization, as they've done with the Oromo Liberation Army as well. And this is a used tactic over many years in Ethiopia. And it really, it doesn't allow us, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit more later as well, but it doesn't allow us to factually look at the role the TPLF had in the years post Abiy's premiership that the central government would now like us to look at and solely identify the TPLF as the most aggressive, antagonist. And it also doesn't allow us to understand that many other actors in the Ethiopian state, including Abiy Ahmed himself, played a crucial role in those years of really devastation for a lot of people, including the Oromo. So this, again, this tactic of labeling was really deliberate, and it's hyperbolic as well. And it really only serves, it's not in relation or relational, I guess, to the TPLF's activities in this, in this last 7 months. It's really just to feed this government's narrative, and it also, again, doesn't give us the opportunity to really understand and process and come to terms with, via means of justice and reconciliation, the role that the TPLF did have, which they did over the last 27 years in Ethiopia. So in terms of its relationship to Oromia, a lot of Oromo people speaking into this narrative about the war often say that the war in Tigray began in Oromia. Since the beginning of Abiy Ahmed's premiership, he has been in a deliberate war with the Oromo Liberation Army and basically everyone else, particularly at the beginning in the Wallagga region of Oromia and then across Oromia, not just with members of the army, but all people who are engaged in alleged or actual activities to resist the government. And this state-sanctioned violence has looked like mass arrests, extrajudicial killings, torture, disappearances, and more. And similar to the narrative that we were first hearing when the government decided to declare war on Tigray in November last year, and they were saying that it was a quick in and out law and order enforcement operation the central government and the Oromia regional government, which we must understand as really just a tentacle or as an arm of the central government, not a body with its own autonomy or its own views on what's happening. We're saying that this war with the OLA would, take 2 weeks and then it would be over. So in neither circumstances, in Oromia nor in Tigray, has this short timeline been the case, or has it eventuated? And the war in Oromia has been via the military, has been via local police, and as of about 2 months ago, we have also heard confirmed reports of Eritrean troops and Amhara militia in Oromia. So in my view, what, in terms of the ramifications, particularly in Oromia, as resources, military resources become limited just because of the sheer number of the ENDF that have been taken as prisoners of war in Tigray, as this human resource becomes limited to compensate for less reach in Oromia, there's, I think, going to be an intensification of the brutality, particularly against civilians or anyone alleged or not really to be affiliated with the OLA. This is also a window really of opportunity for the OLA, as much of the state's military powers we've just been saying, including local police forces, are going to be fighting what will definitely be a protracted war in Tigray. In fact, the OLA spokesperson announced on Twitter a week or more back that the OLA are going to be engaging an intensified operation over the next 3 months in Oromia.
The OLA is the Oromo Liberation Army?
Correct. Thanks for clarifying that. And so speaking again to this reallocation of military resources, I think as we've been seeing over the last couple of days, actually even hours, the deployment of thousands of people from Oromia and other parts of the South, first of all, is going to be sending a lot of young people who have nothing to do with this war, because this war really does belong to one person and a small elite, to their death or to their capture, perpetuating this traumatic cycle of violence. And secondly, it again engages the efforts to narrative build on behalf of Abiy. As I said, this is his war and the elite's war to consolidate power, and to do that via silencing anyone who is taking action or wants to take action in the spirit of self-determination or sovereignty. And Abiy's intent, again, to curate the narrative of this war as being that of the Oromo's war, again, manipulating the narrative that we were talking about at the beginning, a genuinely traumatic period for the Oromo, but his placement of this war as belonging to us or the Oromo people is misplaced and deliberate. And we are also seeing him use political infrastructure in Oromia to validate this positioning. There was I think, parliamentary memo, for lack of a better term, announced today in the Oromia regional state, where there was in an attempt to label those fighting in this war, going from Oromia to Tigray to fight in this war, as what's called jagna, I think, in Amharic, which can be likened to like warrior or like someone heroic, engaging in war. As I was saying at the beginning, and I've said again in my stint here, that period of time where the EPRDF was definitely and obviously dominated by the TPLF was horrible, but it does not for one moment justify any part of this war, and this war does not belong to us as a people, nor is it an act of justice on behalf of what happened during that time. It's none of the things that it's trying to be perpetuated as. So that, and it's also, we were talking about earlier, right? I think maybe off camera, it's also almost tradition for when elites of this empire fight each other, the human resource they use is from is from one part of this colonial dynamic. It's from the South. It's from the historically conquered peoples, in this case, majority from Oromo and otherwise. And it also creates an increasingly complicated dynamic for efforts to unify and address issues and problems between Oromo people themselves in Oromia, when we have people complying with mandates handed down by government that is also murdering us on the other hand. And I think I was saying earlier that this creates an opportunity for the OLA, which they have publicly announced that they will be taking advantage of. It also does the same for other people, groups in the country who are fighting armed or non-armed for some sense of autonomy or sovereignty from the state. And it really creates the opportunity for anything to happen anywhere in the country.
Thanks, Soreti. Let me play the role of the really uninformed outsider in what you yourself have described as a complex situation, and one of the narratives that's become quite that has become quite dominant in some circles outside Ethiopia is that Abiy Ahmed comes in, takes over, takes office, and essentially moves, as it were, to dismantle the ethnic federalism that was implemented by the coalition led by the TPLF, and this has some resonance in many other African countries who have had major difficulties with ethnic and tribal conflict. We look at the case of South Sudan, which gained its independence 10 years ago and was plagued by these kind of difficulties. So there are many who say, okay, young prime minister is trying to unite the country. The Prosperity Party is a non-tribal, non-ethnic, non-sectarian party, but you have these sort of regional ethnicized forces pulling apart, and then we have elections that have just been concluded in a number of regions in Ethiopia. What would your response be to that narrative? That this is the difficult process of nation building is underway, and it means, yes, there's a need for the central government to put down regional ethnic breakaway states, but also to hold democratic elections. But it's one of the narratives that one hears in response to questions about what's happening in these regions. What would your response be, Sorry?
Yeah, it's really important for people to understand that although Ethiopia represents itself, and is also represented by others, as a country that defied colonialism in an era where other countries were not able to do so, this system of multinational federalism, which also was not created by the TPLF, it was agreed on by the OLF, the TPLF, and other parties who were sitting at the negotiation tables after the fall of the Derg regime. It was an attempt to negotiate questions of national liberation whilst keeping together a polity that had been sewn together via very deliberate and very, very, very deliberately colonial means. So that was, it was an opportunity. The disappointing part of the story is that it wasn't fully realized in those 27 years that Ethiopia was a multinational federation. And even though Abiy has dismantled that infrastructure, we can't really say it's no longer a multinational federation, because those questions of individual nationalism still exist and people are still fighting to see those questions realized and answered. So it was not the infrastructure, the political infrastructure of allowing, or at least in theory, designating regional powers to states like Oromia, like the Southern People's nations, and Somali or Tigray. That infrastructure was not the problem. The problem was that it was not honored, and you saw a handful of elites decide to manufacture representations for the people in their regions and use those representations, parties I'm talking about, political parties in each regions, to continue to forward their interest in those regions, rather than genuinely allowing the affairs of the regions to be managed by those of people elected. If we had seen that happen over that time, we might be looking at we probably would have seen elections, free and fair elections happen over that time, and we probably would be looking at a very different Ethiopia today. But it's really important, I think, for us to distinguish between what is often minimalistically by many discourses referred to as, trivial ethnic conflicts between people who should just put it aside and get along, and we need to differentiate that from really people who have very deep histories related to, created by colonialism to each other, and who have been trying to get free actually from Ethiopia ever since it was ever conceived, the idea of Ethiopia was ever conceived. So that what Abiy did when he came to power was really ride the wave of the fact that he, first of all, came to power off the back of a mostly Oromo youth-led civil revolution, right? It came up off the back of that and was, as you said, an Oromo, very exciting, not just for the outside world, but also internally. Riding that wave and knowing that the destination that we're trying to get to is a place of reconciliation, right? But he didn't do any of that work to actually see people speak truth to their narratives, address traumas, and carve out paths of healing for themselves and together, as a collective. Rather, he jumped to using this I guess this decorative discourse of peace, of what he called in his book Medimmer, which is like synergy, like we're all valuable parts of the whole kind of thing, without actually understanding why coming together as a whole was traumatizing to begin with. Not understanding or deliberately bypassing. I don't know which one it was for him, but so him being an Oromo, what I often say is, it was never an ask of the revolution that occurred before he came into power that the person leading the country be an Oromo. That was actually never a question, right? But of course, it was a site of excitement, because the assumption is that you're of us, you understand the grievances, and you'll deal with them accordingly. But again, he was part of that party, what's called the OPDO, the Oromo People's Democratic Organization. That's spelled out of my head. Yes. He was part of a party that was, again, a tentacle of the central government to do its bidding in Oromia. Like, he was not really part of the, or not even really, he was definitely not part of the revolution. In fact, he was a part of the apparata of oppression in the country. He was, part of the security apparata. So there wasn't all of that hype and I guess sound around him, the loud noise around him, it didn't allow us, and I say us because I include myself in it, to engage his position critically. And also, so really him being an Oromo there are plenty of Oromos even there now in the country. That were there recently, even in the time, of imperial conquest. Oromos were part of the project of state violence, right? So it's the question is the freedom of the people at large across Oromia. The question is like the lands not being exploited by elites and people not being able to benefit from their natural resources. These are the questions. It was never about elitist power dynamics.
I just to segue into another issue, just one of the things that has been very noteworthy about the discourse around the most recent conflict, especially since last year, has been a very energized Ethiopian diaspora, people like yourself, who are, very strong, what one sees, especially on social media, on platforms around the country, around the world, partly because, one can see their limitations within Ethiopia in terms of freedoms to be able to communicate that openly. What's, for lack of better, what's the vibe in the diaspora, for you guys now, you are in Melbourne, Oromo activists, I'm sure there are Tigrayans there, there are Amharas there. What's the vibe as whenever I'm in this city, I go to an Ethiopian restaurant and, injera, etc. It's that's the kind of imagination that we have that is now being tested by especially events over the last year.
Mm-hmm. People are doing everything they can with really, for those who are really engaged, which is, I would say, most people. People are doing everything they can to, one, keep in touch and keep connected with what is happening on the ground, which is an ever-evolving situation, as everyone can see, and respond accordingly, whether it's respond to humanitarian needs, whether it's amplifying political demands, whether it's responding to events, that occur on the daily, which is a lot. So I think people are I can say from the moment of Hachalu's assassination, particularly the Oromo diaspora was kicked into full gear, and then from the moment the war in Tigray broke out, the Tigaro community was kicked into full gear, and so there are these, I guess, somewhat isolated efforts to really respond to what feels like, even though we're not there, something that is happening to our own bodies, right? And for most people, in particular the Tigray experience over the last 7+ months, has been happening to their family members, hearing these stories every day, and which has been happening across Oromia up until now, since before that time. So people are like in these in-between states of like, fiery, angry, engaged, passionate, grieving, angry, frustrated, and I'd say it is happening isolated, and there are attempts to collaborate. There are sincere attempts to collaborate and amplify each other's voices. I don't think it's been the simplest thing to do, to meet each other in the middle in this time. I think many people have engaged it consistently. And again, I'm going to use word sincere because I think it has been a sincere effort. But, I think the complication complication is a dumb word, I'm not going to lie. Like it really minimizes what this feels like, right? But basically, the right of the Tigaro people to choose their leaders, right? And those leaders being ousted in really unlawful, violent ways. And the history that those leaders have, and it's not just that, it's the history those leaders have with Oromia, but it goes further to say that it's the silence that was experienced over the years of that violence happening, and also when the violence up until even Hachalu's assassination and after that was occurring, the silence of that of others upon those events, and then being in a moment where there are clear synergies and there are clear needs to work together, and we're all now navigating very raw and real human griefs and experiences, but nonetheless, I believe that solidarity has been as strong as it can be, and it will get stronger. And that that people have been having online, offline, difficult serious conversations that a lot of the time do not probably have conclusions that are concrete or outcomes that are neat or that show a way forward. But this has there has been certainly, a sense of putting in energy to fight in our individual contexts, and that's on the daily, and then trying to see and hear our pain from our particular places in this, on all of this, and then try and come together when we can, how we can, and I don't know, like, that's how I see it, but I know that this is a conversation upon which people see differently, feel that differently. But overall, the vibe is pretty revolutionary, I'd say.
At the current time. So already, all this makes one ask about the prospects for the Ethiopian state, headquarters of the African Union, site of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is, a massive and exciting project for Africa. I know it's still contested, especially up, downstream by Sudan and Egypt. But what is your take, as a young, Ethiopian citizen, vis-a-vis the prospects for the Ethiopian state, given this, the developments that we've seen, especially over the last year and a half, that have been quite tumultuous and currently seem to be intensifying in so many facets. There's a military side, and now there's also talk and fear of talk of ethnic cleansing and also looming famine in these regions. And so just wanted to get your take on what you feel the prospects are for this, for the Ethiopian state, which, as I said, the imagination of the rest of Africa has always been this Ethiopia, the country Ethiopia, which was never colonized, is headquarters of the African Union, etc., etc.
That is a question that I really want to address, but if you will allow me, John, as I was ending my last response, I just wanted to add one more thing to kind of what we're experiencing from the outside looking in. And I will really address this question of the prospects of the Ethiopian state, because I agree it's a question on everyone's minds. I think there is also a population of people inside and outside the country who are part of the internal Ethiopian dynamic, who don't know what to do with all of what's happening, in the sense that there has been such an attachment, really sewn in by the state project, but people have really taken in as an identity to this idea of Ethiopianism, and Ethiopia being sort of above fault, unable to commit, any sort of unjust, exaggerated violence. And I think a lot of, people's values, moral compasses are being tested right now as we see, human life collide with political rhetoric and nationalisms and such. I don't know if that made sense, but I just wanted to speak to that because it's a real big part of what's happening with how people are relating to this right now. And it's also what's not just creating rifts is minimalistic word. It's creating really deep anger between people groups in the diaspora and also in the country, because you're seeing very, very, I would say, strange prioritizations happening. Anyway, in terms of prospects for the Ethiopian state, I think that there are very few people, like let's take Tagara people, for example. It would be, sort of absurd to ask them to prioritize the continued consolidation of Ethiopia over the things that you were mentioning, like the fact that there is a looming famine, like the fact that there are thousands of women who have suffered sexual violence in the country, that the war is still protracting, and that these abuses are going to continue, and that solutions are far off, because humanitarian aid is still going to be difficult to get to, blockaded and such. So and then in Oromia, I think other than the elite communities who are being, I guess, pulled in by the government to participate in their projects and their narratives, I don't really think that you're seeing much investment, ideologically, intellectually, emotionally, in seeing the state continue. That's just not the priority, right? The state hasn't been engaged in trying to protect, preserve, or see life prosper in the country. So in terms of the Ethiopian state's prospects, I think they're bleak in terms of continuing on in the form that we have known it as Ethiopia, the state. I know that this isn't what a lot of people want to hear, particularly the players that you mentioned in your question. And Ethiopia has also been, very, very integral in the strategic ambitions and decisions made in the Horn region by multilateral organizations, by global superpowers, that the idea of the Ethiopian state not continuing is really difficult to fathom. What I hope is that whatever happens moving forward, that for the first time, the mass in that region of the world are the ones who decide and are the ones that drive or create the answer for whatever happens next. The most devastating situation for me is that the Ethiopian state continues against the will of the people. That I think that the worst thing that can happen is that after everything that people have gone through, that elites fabricate and force upon the people a decision that they do not want. And that's only going to see cycles of violence continue. So I really hope that moving forward, we move away from the prioritization of elites in the country and outside of the country as to what happens in that part of the world, and that the people, and I think that this is going to happen regardless, because people are just at a tipping point, that the people really are on the front lines of what and who is considered, moving forward, and whatever that is, right? Yeah. Whatever that is, let it be for them.
One last question. Time moves very quickly.
Yeah, we're not kidding about that.
Yeah. Prime Minister Abiy came to office, great excitement, not only in Ethiopia itself, but throughout the region, throughout Africa, around the world. The recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize for making peace with Eritrea, and that seems to have changed. Let me just ask you a very simplistic question. What happened? The final question, what happened? I mean, we're all excited. So,
yeah, right? Yeah. Well, I guess the question is, what were we excited about, right? Like, he came into power off of a very difficult time, and he used very specific language to focus on one part and one part only, about who he was. And it wasn't really about who he was, it was really about what the moment needed, and trying to communicate himself as the necessary thing for that, necessary person for that moment, or the vision for that moment. And for example, the Eritrean peace deal, its contents weren't really, I think, what was being recognized when the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded. Because now, all of these months on, we can see, or we can, I guess, make a substantive guess as to what those initial conversations were prelude for. But I think what was really being awarded, and what really excited a lot of us, was our own infatuation and romanticization with this language of peace, of dialogue, of reconciliation, without really paying attention to what those things take. And on the part of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, or however that's awarded, I think it really triggered kind of the neoliberal obsession with that language proliferating in Africa, in parts of Africa. And perhaps those tendencies were triggered in the rest of us as well. So I think what happened was what Abiy always intended to happen, but kept covered up for some time. I think you might have heard, or others might have heard, that Abiy has a very specific imagination of himself. He sees himself as existing in a line of kings, of emperors, or royalty, really evoking this imperial imagination of what Ethiopia was, and believing that is what Ethiopia must be, to continue on, not respond to the deep diversity and, in culture, language, ethnicities, national questions, desires, whatever that exists in the country. So I think he did what he thought was most strategic and necessary to appear favorable in that moment, because he knew what that moment needed, what people wanted to see and feel in that moment. And then he continued as planned. So I think, moving forward, I think you mentioned the elections before as well. I think they are also, I think they were supposed to serve cosmetic benefit, right? But I don't think they even did that at the point at which the elections took place in the country. So I think the Nobel Peace Prize, in the context of things, honestly, is neither here nor there. The elections in the context of things are neither here nor there. You have a deeply aggravated, angry, frustrated, oppressed, brutalized people in the millions who all have one direction to look at when they say, where did this violence come from?
Well, on that rather sad note, I as I said, time flies and our time is up, but that has been an absolutely fascinating and illuminating conversation with Soreti Kadir. I would like to say thank you very much. I'm sure we'll be speaking again. It's a situation that is moving quickly. I'd like to thank you once again. I started the program saying good evening. It's good morning for you. And thank you very much.
You're most welcome, John. Thank you so much for having me. We really appreciated the conversation. Okay.